began as a simple environmental survey. I was hired to collect water samples from a remote mountain lake, a black mirror hidden miles from the nearest town. On the map it was called Caro Lake, but locals used another name whispered under their breath, Hollow Lake. When I stopped at the last roadside cafe for directions, an old man polishing mugs looked up with pale gray eyes. "After sunset," he said, voice like gravel, "the water wakes up. Finish your work before dark." Before I could ask more, he turned and disappeared into the kitchen. The road beyond town narrowed to a single cracked lane. Pines pressed in from both sides. Fog pooled low, swallowing the headlights until the world was nothing but trees and the faint hiss of tires on damp asphalt. Finally, the trees opened, revealing a vast sheet of water. Flat, black, and perfectly still. No ripples, no birds, just silence. I set my camp near the rotting remains of a pier. The boards sagged like old bones. As I unpacked my equipment, a faint sound brushed the edge of hearing. Low voices like a distant crowd beneath the surface. I froze, listening. When I raised my recorder, the whispers stopped. Playback revealed nothing but static. Night fell quickly. Mist crawled from the lake onto the shore, curling around my boots. I brewed coffee and tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest. That's when I heard it, a single bell tolling across the water. One deep note that rolled through the valley. Then another, slow, heavy. But there was no church here, at least none above water. Sleep was impossible. I must have drifted for moments because suddenly I was standing, not dreaming, standing on cobblestone streets lit by an underwater moon. Stone houses tilted like they were breathing. Faceless figures stood in doorways, their heads turning as I passed. Their mouths moved, forming words I almost understood. I tried to call out, but my voice made no sound. A child-shaped shadow reached a hand toward me. Before our fingers touched, I woke to the sound of my tent zipper sliding open. The night was empty. But outside, prints of bare feet, small, human, led from the water to the flap of my tent and then back again, vanishing into the mist. At dawn, I drove to the nearest town hall. The clerk, a woman in her 60s, went pale at the lake's name. In a back room, she produced a crumbling folder of yellowed papers. Half a century ago, she explained, a village named Greyhaven occupied that valley. When the dam upriver broke during construction, a wall of water buried the town overnight. Dozens of bodies were never recovered. The last record described a stone church, its bell tower the tallest in the county. Curiosity became obsession. That evening, clouds bruised the sky as I returned to the shore. The air tasted of metal. I strapped on a small diving rig and stepped into the icy black. The water swallowed every sound. My flashlight beam cut through silt and darkness until shapes emerged. Walls, rooftops, the crooked spire of a church. The bell, tarnished but whole, stood like a sentinel in the deep. The tolling began again. One long note, then a chorus of whispers rising all around me. They were everywhere, threading through the current, dozens of voices weaving into a single plea. Remember us. Do not forget. My heart pounded against the regulator. I wanted to speak, but bubbles carried my words away. My oxygen gauge ticked lower, and the whispers grew urgent, a tide of sorrow pressing against my chest. Then a sound like a sigh swept the water, and a single voice, gentle but commanding, filled my head. You have heard. That is enough. A beam of silver light pierced the depths, not from my flashlight, but from somewhere above, as if the moon itself reached down. I kicked upward, lungs screaming, and broke the surface to a night so clear it felt carved from glass. Behind me, the lake exhaled, a deep rolling groan that shivered the stars. At dawn, I returned with my supervisor. To our disbelief, the waterline had dropped several feet overnight. Jutting through the mist, the stone bell tower of Greyhaven's church broke the surface, its cross catching the early sun. No storm, no seismic activity, just a silent lake revealing its secret. The old man from the cafe waited on the shore. He held his hat to his chest, eyes glistening. They only wanted to be remembered, he said softly. Now they can rest. I filed my official report. Levels of minerals, clarity of water, harmless algae. But I left out the whispers, the dream, the footprints. Some truths don't need proof. They only need someone willing to listen. And still, on quiet nights, I sometimes wake to the faint echo of a bell, ringing across a lake hundreds of miles away, reminding me of the voices beneath the water. Voices that will never be forgotten. Would you have gone into that water?